And if you step outside the world of religious taboos, the issue of thinking about the sanctioning of evil, thinking about the sanctioners of evil, of thinking about sanctioners of sanctioners of sanctioners of evil, is a real and important issue to think about, to take stands on, and to understand the, as I'll put it, the endurance of evil. And nothing, there can't be a more powerful, it's a depressing, but a powerful example of this than October 7th and its aftermath. So, and think of some of these issues and their application. The primary, as I said, in regard to October 7th, is to be on the side of Israel, to be pro-Israel, to be pro-Israeli self-defense, to stand up for Israel. That's the primary. But you have to stand up for them because they're in the midst of being attacked by an enormous evil. So you have Hamas, who are mass murderers, who've been committed since inception to wiping out Israel. Their motivation is to wipe out Israel because it's good. It's hard to think of getting a clearer example of hatred of the good for being the good as animating a whole cause, movement, and organization. This is the depth of evil, and it has to be thought of in that way, and it cannot be sanctioned in any way. But then you had Hamas's sanctioners. This is the student, if we take just the US, the student protesters around the world. It's more than just students, and even in the US, it's more than just students. The student groups and protesters whose immediate reaction to October 7th, to the attacks, to the mass murder, is to side with the mass murderers, to attack and blame Israel and try to whitewash and excuse Hamas. It was an enormous evil that was going on. What the evil is that they're sanctioning Hamas. And Hamas took notice of this, of the fact, oh yeah, we seem to have some real approval, and we praise the students who understand that our cause is legitimate and so on. They took, it's part of what it means that when you sanction evil, you empower it, you give it confidence. So there was an enormous evil here in the sanctioning of the evil. Then you had the sanctioners of the sanctioners. You had the university presidents and administration and their statements after October 7th, and then when they were brought before Congress to testify, and that their performance was so abysmal that people thought, right, and they might not put it like this, but they thought of it in effect in this way, that aren't they giving some kind of cover and moral approval to these students, groups, and protesters who are on the side of Hamas and against Israel? And they certainly were. So they were sanctioners of the sanctioners. And then you had sanctioners of the sanctioners of the sanctioners. These were the billionaires who were funding the universities, helping these presidents stay presidents and in existence. And I mean, this was a really good thing. For a number of these people, the aftermath of October 7th was a real wake-up call. It was, I'm sanctioning, I'm giving my moral aid, approval, and financial aid to university presidents and administrations, which are sanctioning these student protesters and groups, which are sanctioning the enormous evil of Hamas. And they rightly thought of themselves, because they are, as we're partly causally responsible for this. We've helped make this happen in a causal way, and they have, and you can't escape that. And then there's a question of, yeah, do we bear moral responsibility? And for the better of them, the fact that they started withdrawing their funding, demanding that the presidents resign or be fired, was, if we continue to do this, then we're morally responsible. It might have only been we were causally responsible, we were ignorant of what was going on campus. But you can't understand the issue of what is going on if you don't think of there's these categories, and they're all really important categories of the perpetrators of the evil, whether the sanctioners of the sanctioners, and the sanctioners of the sanctioners of the sanctioners. For each of the cases, you have to think, you can't just have a knee-jerk reaction of, well, damn everybody here. You have to think morally about what is going on. So for instance, for the student protesters, some I think of them as they're vile and vicious. They know what Hamas is. But for some of them, when you see what is going on, they're more clueless. They don't know what Hamas is. They can't find Israel on a map. The chants from the river to the sea, they don't know what it means. They've joined. It's not good that they've joined the protest, but it's not the abysmal evil of the people who know what Hamas is and are siding with them because of what Hamas is. So even within the student groups and protesters, you can't have just one reaction and damn everybody. And for some of these students, and this is part of what is so abysmal about the university's responses, what they would need is to be morally chewed out. That you don't fully know what you're doing, but what you're doing is aiding and abetting evil. You should not be taking stands like this when you don't know anything about the issue and your kind of knee-jerk reaction is to side with the losers. There's something that you're doing that's really morally wrong and has all kinds of detrimental consequences. If they had real educators and real professors, that's what the educators and professors would be doing. And not just, oh, you're making a thinking mistake and a logical error. No, you're doing something morally wrong. And you don't have to damn them and I'll never talk to you again. But they need to be called out. And part of the atmosphere is nobody will call them out. If you take the issue of sanctioners of the sanctioners, I view some of the university presidents and administration as worse than the student protesters. Because some of the student protesters have a kind of excuse of ignorance, of miseducation, because of how hopeless what they get in their classrooms is today. The presidents don't have an excuse of, we don't know what Hamas is, we don't know what Israel is, we don't know that Israel's a free country, and what Hamas, the minute they get into power, what they institute is a dictatorship. They don't have the excuse of ignorance, or if they're that ignorant, they can't be a university president. And if you think then of the moral estimate of what I talked about of sanctioners of the sanctioners of the sanctioners, here I view it that many of these billionaires, they're way less morally responsible, and some maybe none. It's that they've causally propped these up, but the fact that they're questioning it and it's a wake-up call, it's like that speaks well of them and what they're doing. And so the idea that it's like you just have this blanket reaction that you damn everything because all these people are in one sense on the side of evil, that's not real moral evaluation, real moral estimate. It's not what the issue of moral sanction is actually about in a non-religious context.